Good evening. My name is Colby Cunningham, and I'm a reporter for SCTV. Here with me tonight is Dr. Adrienne Gathman, a political science professor here at Simpson and an expert in constitutional law, state politics, and the American presidency. Within this interview, I hope to take a look at the changing role of the American presidency within both the U.S. political system and the American society. So, Professor Gathman, to start it off, my first question to you is this: how specifically has the American presidency changed within the past year? How have cultural norms been broken? How has campaigning changed? And what role has COVID-19 played in all of this?
Sure. So when it comes to the change in the presidency, most of what we've seen is just a change in traditions and a change in how the president relates to the public, how the president relates to other branches of government. We've seen this specifically in the lack of daily press briefings and the removal of those. That's kind of happened over the course of the 4 years. And we've seen a change in that information coming from the presidency to the public. Instead of it coming through those press briefings, now we're seeing it come through Twitter. Whether or not these traditions that have been broken or just changed will stay in place is something we're not going to know until there's someone else sitting in that office. Whether the norms that were previously there of daily briefings and using the press secretary as that connection between the media and the president, if that reverts back, we won't know until there's someone else in that office. In terms of campaigning, COVID-19 has obviously played a huge role in what we're seeing happen with campaigning. We saw the two conventions, the Republican and the Democratic, had to move totally online, which is not necessarily a bad thing or something that's out of the realm of what the purpose of the conventions was historically in recent history, because conventions today are really just solidifying the nomination that we already knew was coming, and they serve more like a public relations event, which can still happen online. You just don't have that huge group of people cheering on the floor, but you can still reach the public in the same way. Campaign events we've seen at Simpson, this is a different year than we would typically have. Normally we would get visits from candidates and candidate surrogates, but we haven't had those this year, unfortunately. We still have a couple days left and we'll see what happens. The Republican Party is using more in-person stuff than the Democratic Party is, but those kind of campaign connections that we usually see them making are just not there anymore.
I did hear that Joe Biden's expected to make a last-minute visit here sometime this week.
Okay, we'll see what happens.
So given all of these changes, how do you think both candidates have executed their so-called presidential spectacle?
Their presidential spectacle. So part of Trump's spectacle is always going to be his use of social media, his larger-than-life personality, and his "I'm not every politician." This was his message in 2016. It was a successful message that year, and he's trying to run on that again. I think one of the problems with running on that message again is he is now a politician. He's 4 years into a presidency, and so saying you aren't a politician doesn't hit in the same way that it did 4 years ago. Some people were hoping back in 2016 when he won the presidency that his relationship with the media, his relationship with other elected officials might change once he's in that office. We haven't really seen that. He still uses Twitter to inflame and criticize and call out. And that hits well with his base, but it doesn't necessarily hit well with the total population. And in terms of Biden's spectacle, he is a career politician, so he cannot run on anything but being a career politician. But when you're running against someone who isn't and has had some of those missteps and criticisms because of the missteps when it comes to relating to other people, whether that be the public or politicians or the media, Biden has tried to set his spectacle as staying that moderate Democrat that is steady and confident. And I think both of them have been successful in where they're aiming themselves. But whether or not that translates into a win is really the question.
With that being said, I would like to hear your predictions as it relates to the outcome of the presidential election. Do you think that voters will re-elect Donald Trump, or do you think that they'll go for his Democratic counterpart, Joe Biden?
It's hard to say for sure one way or the other way. I think leading up to this election, the polls have clearly shown that Biden has an edge over Trump, but polls aren't always everything because there is a margin of error that exists within that polling. And one of the things I talk about with all of my classes is to focus on that margin of error, because the margin of error can change who that poll says is going to win the election.
As we saw in 2016.
As we saw in 2016. And all of those results, or at least most of them where Trump won but Clinton had been predicted to win, were within the margin of error. And many of those states are still within that margin of error. So while I believe that Biden will win the election, it's not a 100% certainty thing.
All right, on a more local level, what are your predictions surrounding the Iowa races for the Senate and the House? And how important are these?
Yeah, I think the Iowa Senate race is extremely important. It is one of just a few swing Senate seats. And those few swing Senate seats will be the deciding factor in which political party is in the majority in the Senate. So who wins the Iowa Senate race is huge, which is why we are being punched in the face by political advertisements from both of those candidates, because it's not just the candidates themselves running the ads, it's also their parties, because this seat is so important. I think Theresa Greenfield, much like Joe Biden, has the edge, and I think the Senate seat will follow much what the presidency does here in the state of Iowa. There will be some people who vote Democrat for one and Republican for the other, but I think it will be few and far between, and there will be some level of connection between those races. So Theresa Greenfield, to me, has an edge, but that edge is not solid, and it all comes down to what turnout looks like here in the state of Iowa. In terms of the House races, I think House race for District 4, which was Steve King's seat, it will not be his seat anymore. This is already decided, but I think it will stay Republican. I think Feenstra will win District 4. The other 3 districts, I think will stay Democrat, but again, it's going to depend on turnout. Maybe not every, but many of the sites that I have looked at when it comes to polling, when it comes to swing states, when it comes to swing districts, they have Iowa hanging out in gray in most of these districts, the state for the Senate and the state for the presidency. And that gray is just telling us, hey, the polls are too close for us to even know. And so turnout is a huge part of how these elections are going to end up.
All right, that was my final question, and I think that's all that I have time for. So Dr. Gathman, thank you for sharing your insight with us and for supporting student journalism here at Simpson. And with that, I will turn it back to the studio to Live and Sit.